on magic. As with any other topic, before we begin our treatise on magic, it is necessary to distinguish the various meanings of the term, for there are as many meanings of magic as there are of magician. First, the term magician means a wise man. For example, the Trismegistus of the Egyptians, the Druids among the Gauls, the Gymnosophists among the Indians, the Kabbalists among the Hebrews, the Magi among the Persians, who were followers of Zoroaster, the Sophists among the Greeks, and the wise men among the Latins. Second, magician refers to someone who does wondrous things merely by manipulating active and passive powers, as occurs in chemistry, medicine, and such fields. This is commonly called natural magic. Third, it involves circumstances such that the actions of nature or of a higher intelligence occur in such a way as to excite wonderment by their appearances. This type of magic is called prestidigitation. Fourth, magic refers to what happens as a result of powers of attraction and repulsion between things. For example, the pushes, motions, and attractions due to magnets and such things. When all these actions are due not to active and passive qualities, but rather to the spirit or soul existing in things. This is called natural magic in proper sense. Fifth, the meaning includes, in addition to these powers, the use of words, chants, calculations of numbers and times, images, figures, symbols, characters, or letters. This is a form of magic which is intermediate between the natural and preternatural or the supernatural, and is properly called mathematical magic, or even more accurately, occult philosophy. The sixth sense adds to this the exhortation or invocation of the intelligences and the external or higher forces by means of prayers, dedications, incensings, sacrifices, resolutions, and ceremonies directed to the gods, demons, and heroes. Sometimes this is done for the purpose of contacting a spirit itself, to become its vessel and instrument in order to appear wise, although this wisdom can easily be removed, together with the spirit, by means of a drug. This is the magic of the hopeless, who become the vessels of evil demons, which they seek through their notorious art. On the other hand, this is sometimes done to command and control lower demons with the authority of higher demonic spirits, by honoring and entreating the latter while restricting the former with oaths and petitions. This is transnatural or metaphysical magic and is properly called theurgy. Seventh, magic is the petition or invocation not of the demons and heroes themselves, but through them, to call upon the souls of the dead humans in order to predict and know absent and future events, by taking their cadavers or parts thereof to some oracle. This type of magic, both in its subject matter and in its purpose, is called necromancy. If the body is not present, but the oracle is beseeched by invoking the spirit residing in its viscera with very active incantations, then this type of magic is properly called Pythian, for, if I may say so, this was the usual meaning of inspired at the temple of the Pythian Apollo. Eighth, sometimes incantations are associated with a person's physical parts in any sense: garments, excrements, remnants, footprints, and anything which is believed to have had made some contact with the person. In that case, and if they are used to unite, untie, fasten, weaken, and then sometimes constitutes that type of magic called wicked, if it leads to evil. If it leads to good, it is to be counted among the medicines belonging to a certain method and type of medical practice. If it leads to its final destruction and death, then it's called poisonous magic. Ninth, all those who are able, for any reason, to predict distant and future events are said to be magicians. These are generally called diviners because of their purpose. The primary groups of such magicians use either the four material principles, fire, air, water, and earth, and they are thus called pyromancers, hydromancers, and geomancers. Or they use the three objects of knowledge, the natural, mathematical, and divine. There are also other types of prophecy, for augurers, soothsayers, and others such make predictions from an inspection of natural or physical things. Geomancers make predictions in their own way by inspecting mathematical objects like numbers, letters, and certain lines and figures, and also from the appearance, light, and location of the planets and similar objects. Still, others make predictions by using divine things, like sacred names, coincidental locations, brief calculations, and preserving circumstances. In our day, these latter are not called magicians, since for us the word magic sounds bad and has an unworthy connotation. So this is not called magic, but prophecy. Finally, magic and magician have a pejorative connotation, not been included or examined in the above meanings. In this sense, a magician is any foolish evildoer who is endowed with the power of helping or harming someone by means of a communication with, or even a pact with, a foul devil. This meaning does not apply to wise men, or indeed to authors, although some of them have adopted the name hooded magicians. For example, the authors of the book, the De Malo Maleficarum, also known as the Witch's Hammer. As a result, the name used today by all writers of this type, as can be seen in the comments and beliefs of ignorant and foolish priests. Therefore, when the word magic is used, it should either be taken in one of the senses distinguished above, or, if it is used without qualifications, it should be taken in the strongest and most worthy sense as dictated by the logicians, and especially by the Aristotle book, Book 5 of the Topics. So as it is used by and among philosophers, magician then means a wise man who has the power to act. Nevertheless, the fact remains that the word, when unqualified, means whatever is signified by a common usage. Another common meaning is found among various groups of priests who frequently speculate about that foul demon called the devil. Still, other meanings are to be found in the common usages of different peoples and believers. Given these distinctions, we will deal generally with the three types of magic: the divine, the physical, and the mathematical. The first two of these types of magic necessarily relate to what is good and best, but the third type includes both good and evil, since the magician may direct it towards either. Although all three types agree on many principles and actions, in the third type, wickedness, idolatry, lawlessness, and charge of idolatry, are found when error and deception are used to turn things which are intrinsically good into evil. Here, the mathematical type of magic is not defined by the usually mentioned fields of mathematics, i.e. geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, optics, music, and etc., but rather by its likeness and relationship to these disciplines. It is similar to geometry in use that it uses figures and symbols, to music in its chants, and to arithmetic in its numbers and manipulations, to astronomy in its concerns for times and motions, and to optics in making observations. In general, it is similar to mathematics as a whole, either because it mediates between the divine and natural actions, or because it shares or lacks something of both. For some things are intermediaries because they participate in both extremes, others because they are excluded from both extremes, in which case they should not be called intermediaries, but a third species which has not the other two but outside of them. From what has been said, it is clear how divine and physical magic differ from the third type. To turn now to the particulars, magicians take it as axiomatic that in all the panorama before our eyes, God acts on the gods. The gods act on the celestial or astral bodies, which are divine bodies. These act on the spirits who reside in and control the stars, one of which is the earth. The spirits act on the elements on the compounds on the senses on the soul, and the soul on the whole animal. This is the descending scale. By contrast, the ascending scale is from the animal through the soul to the senses, through the senses to compounds, from compounds to elements, through these to spirits, through the spirits in the elements to those in the stars, through these to the incorporeal gods who have ethereal substance or body, through them to the soul of the world or the spirit of the universe, and through that to the contemplation of the one, most simple, best, greatest, incorporeal, absolute, and self-sufficient being. Thus, there is a descent from God through the world to animals, and an ascent from animals through the world to God. He is the highest point of the scale, pure active power, the purest light. At the bottom of the scale is matter, darkness, and pure passive potency, which can become all things from the bottom, just as he can make all things from the top. Between the highest and lowest levels, there are intermediaries, the higher of which have a greater share of light and action and power of active power, while the lower levels have a greater share of darkness, potency, and passive power. As a result, all light in lower things, which comes to them from above, is more powerful in higher things, and also all darkness in higher things is stronger in lower things. But the natural and power of light and darkness are equal, for light diffuses and penetrates through the lowest and deepest darkness, but darkness does not touch the purest sphere of light. Thus, light penetrates and conquers darkness and overflows to infinity, while darkness does not penetrate, or overwhelm, or equal the light, but rather is very weak compared to light. Parallel to the three types of magic mentioned above, there are three different worlds to be distinguished: the archetypal, the physical, and the rational. Friendship and strife are located in the archetypal world, fire and water in the physical world, and light and darkness in the mathematical world. Light and darkness descend from fire and water, which in turn descend from peace and strife. Thus, the first world produces the third world through the second, and the third world is reflected in the first through the second. Leaving aside those principles of magic which play on the superstitious and which, whatever they be, are unworthy of the general public, we will direct our thoughts only to those which contribute to wisdom and which can satisfy better minds. Nevertheless, No type of magic is unworthy of notice and examination, because every science deals with the good, as Aristotle says in the introduction of his De Anima, and as Thomas and other more contemplative theologians agree. Nevertheless, all this should be kept far away from profane and wicked people, and from the multitudes, for nothing is so good that impious and sacrilegious and wicked people cannot contort in its proper benefit into evil. In general, there are two types of efficient cause, nature and the will. The will is threefold: human, spiritual, and divine. Nature, as used here, is twofold: intrinsic and extrinsic. Furthermore, intrinsic nature is of two kinds: matter, or the subject, and form with its natural power. Extrinsic nature is also of two kinds. The first, which is preferably called an image of nature, is a trace and shadow or light which remains in a thing within its body, like light and heat in the sun and in other hot bodies. The second emanates and radiates from a subject, like light, which flows from the sun and is found in illuminated things, and like heat, which resides with light in the sun and is also found in heated bodies. By examining the number of these causes, we can descend to the differentiation of powers or effects produced by the first cause through the intermediate, down to the closest and the lowest ones, by restricting the universal cause, which itself does not attend to any available subject rather than another. For, although this cause and its causal power always remain immutably the same, it produces contrary effects in different subjects with the help of different types of matter. As a result, there need be only one such simple, principal, efficient cause, like there is only one sun, one heat and one light, which by turning forward or backward, by approaching and receding, mediately and immediately causes the winter, the summer, and all the different and contrary weather, and the ordering of the seasons. Matter is also derived from the same cause. If we wish to believe that those who think that the four commonly mentioned elements change into each other, the originator of this view was Plato, who sometimes says that all things were produced from one matter and one efficient cause. But whatever may have been the method of production used by the first universal cause, and whether one assumes only one or many material principles, any human or spiritual secondary cause must recognize that, because of the great multitude and variety of producing species, there are many types of matter having act or form, through which a subject is able to influence things outside itself. In regard to the powers or forms of accidents which are transmitted from subject to subject, some are observable. For example, those that belong to the genus of active and passive qualities, and the things that immediately follow from them, like heating and cooling, wetting and drying, softening and hardening, attracting and repelling. Others are more hidden because their effects are also more obscure. For example, to be happy or sad, to experience desire or aversion, and fear of boldness. These are said to be caused by external impressions acting on the cognitive power in humans and on the estimative power in animals. Thus, when a child or infant sees a snake, or when a sheep sees a wolf, it conceives an image, without any other experience, of hostility and of fear of its own death or destruction. The explanation of this is to be found in the internal sense, which is, indeed, moved by the external impressions, although indirectly. For nature gives not only existence to each species, but also the desire in each individual to preserve itself in its present state. Thus, it implants in each thing an internal spirit or sense, if you prefer that word, by which is from an internal dictate it recognizes and avoids great dangers. This can be seen not only in the examples already given, but also in all things in which, even if they seem to be defective or dead, there still resides a spirit striving with all its power to conserve the present condition. This happens in falling drops of liquids, which form a sphere to avoid disintegration, and also in falling bodies which are attracted to a center and tend to gather their parts into a sphere, lest they break up and disperse. This is also found in pieces of straw or wood thrown on a fire, and in thin tissues and membranes which recoil to avoid, somehow, their own destruction. This particular sense is located in all things and is a form of life, although, in accordance with the common custom, we do not call it an animal, which refers to a specific soul, because these components cannot be called animals. Nevertheless, in the order of the universe, one can recognize that there is one spirit which is diffused everywhere and in all of things, and that everywhere and in all things there is a sense of grasping things which perceives such efforts and passions. Just as our soul produces, originally and in a general way, all vital activities from the whole body, and even though the whole soul is in the whole body and each of its parts, nevertheless, it does not reproduce every action in the whole body or in each of its parts. Rather, it causes vision in the eyes, hearing in the ears, taste in the mouth. In the same way, the soul of the world is in the whole world, and is everywhere so adapted to matter that, at each place, it produces the proper subject and causes the proper actions. Therefore, although the world soul is located equally everywhere, it does not act equally everywhere, because matter is not arranged to be equally disposed to it everywhere. Thus, the whole soul is in the whole body, in the bones and in the veins and in the heart. It is no more present in one part than in another, and it is no less present in one part than in the whole, nor in the whole less than in one part. Rather, it causes a nerve to be a nerve in one place, a vein to be a vein elsewhere, blood to be blood, and the heart to be a heart elsewhere. And as these parts happen to be changed, either by an extrinsic efficient cause or by an intrinsic passive principle, then the activity of the soul must also change. This is the most important and most fundamental of all principles which provide an explanation of the marvels found in nature, namely, that because of the active principle and spirit or universal soul, nothing is so incomplete, defective, or imperfect, or, according to common opinion, so completely insignificant that it could not become the source of great events. Indeed, on the contrary, a very large disintegration into such components must occur for almost completely new world to be generated from them. While bronze is more similar to gold and is closer to the distinctive properties of gold than are the ashes of bronze, still, in a transmutation, these ashes of bronze are closer to the form of gold that is bronze. Likewise, we see that all seeds, which are orientated to producing a particular species, happen to be rather alike, as though they were the same and not different. since they are similar and distinctive and related. He who believes otherwise is like someone who thinks that an ape can be changed into a human more easily than the seed implanted in a woman, which previously was food and bread. Nevertheless, in every production, there must be present similarity and a form of the same species, just as a house or a garment results from a model in the maker's mind. In the case of artifacts, likewise, in the productions of nature, a species of things is generated and defined by the exemplar, which is distinctive of the matter which generates the form. For example, we see the same types of food and the same heavens, water and houses reproduced in substance, a dog into a dog, a human into a human, a cat into a cat, and a dog generates the same species of dog, and a human the same species of human. From this, it is clear that the entire cause of differences is due to an idea, which is generally present everywhere in nature, and which is later limited to this or that species, depending on whether one or other species resembles the idea more. As a result, any magician who wishes to carry out his work in accordance with nature must especially understand this idea principle and how it applies specifically to species, numerically to numbers, and individually to individuals. From this, he formulates an image of the proportions of the matter so formed, and with good reasons reinforces the result with the wisdom and power of his magic. Many also bring about cures and injuries by connecting symbols with particular components, or by appealing to those who can communicate with or take part in curing of destructive forces. In this way, the work of magic is restricted and applied to a particular individual. Leaving aside other arguments, it is clear from these experiences that every soul and spirit has some degree of continuity, and the universal spirit, which is recognized to be located not only where the individual soul lives and perceives, but also to be spread out everywhere in its essence and substance. As many Platonists and Pythagoreans have taught, as a result, vision grasps the most distant things immediately and without motion, and, indeed, the eye, or some part thereof, extends immediately to the stars, or immediately from the stars to the eye. Furthermore, the soul, in its power, is present in some way in the entire universe, because it apprehends substances which are not included in the body in which it lives, although they are related to it. Thus, if certain impediments are excluded, the soul has an immediate and sudden presence of which distant things, which are not joined to it by any motion, which nobody would deny, but rather are directly present in a certain sense. Experiences teaches this also, in the case of those whose nose has been cut off. If they arrange to grow a new nose for themselves from flesh of some other animal, and if that animal whose flesh was used dies, then as the body of that animal rots, so does the borrowed nose. From this, it is clear that the soul diffuses outside of the body in every aspect of its nature. It also follows that the soul knows not only of the members of its own body, but also everything for which it has any use, participation, or interaction. There is no value in the stupid argument, advanced by those who lack true philosophical principles, that a thing which is touched by something else does not itself perceive that. Indeed, in one sense, this is true if we were distinguishing between species or individuals, but it is false if we are distinguishing one bodily part from another. For example, If someone injures a finger or pricks one part of the body with a pin, the whole body is immediately disturbed everywhere, and not just in the part where the injury occurred. And so, since every soul is in contact with the universal soul, it is not possible to find in this case the same effects which occur in bodies which do not mutually penetrate into each other. For example, if someone injures a finger or pricks one part of the body with a pin, the whole body is immediately disturbed everywhere, and not just in the part where the injury occurred. And so, since every soul is in contact with the universal soul, it is not possible to find in this case the same effects which occur in bodies which do not mutually penetrate into each other. Rather, for spiritual substances, a different comparison is needed. For instance, if innumerable lamps are lit, they all act together as though they were one light, and no one light impedes or reflects or excludes another. The same thing happens when many voices are diffused through the same air, or if many visible rays, to use common saying, spread out to reveal the same visible whole. All these rays pass through the same medium, and while some move in straight lines and others obliquely, they do not interfere with each other. In the same way, innumerable spirits and souls, when spread out through the same space, do not interfere with each other such that diffusion of one would affect the diffusion of an infinity of others. This power belongs not only to the soul, but also to certain accidents, like sound, light, and vision. The reason is that the whole soul is located in the whole body and in every part of the body, and that the whole soul apprehends all things, however diverse and distant, which are around it outside of its body. This is a sign that the soul is not included in the body as its first act and substance, and that it is not circumscribed by the body, rather in itself and by itself. It should be understood only as a second act. This principle is the cause of innumerable marvelous effects, although its nature need to be investigated. This soul and divine substance cannot be inferior to the accidents which issue from its effects, traces, and shadows. I declare that if the voice operates outside the body which produces it, and enters as a whole into innumerable ears on all sides, then why cannot the whole substance which produces the voice which is tied to certain organs of the body be located in different places and parts? Furthermore, it must be noted that occult intelligence is not heard or understood in all languages, for the voices spoken by humans are not heard in the same way as the voices of nature. As a result, poetry, especially of the tragic type, as Plotinus says, has a very great effect on the wavering thoughts of the soul. Likewise, not all writings have the same impact as those markings which signify things by the particular way in which they are drawn and configured. Thus, when certain symbols are arranged in different ways, they represent different things. In a circle, the attraction of love. When opposed, the descent into hate and separation. When brief, defective, and broken, they point to destruction. When knotted, to bondage. When strung out, to dissolution. Furthermore, these symbols do not have a fixed and definite form. Rather, each person, by the dictate of his own inspiration or by the impulse of his own spirit, determines his own reactions of desiring or rejecting something. And thus, he characterizes for himself each symbol according to his own impulse. And as the divine spirit personally exerts certain powers which are not expressed in any explicit language, speech, or writing. Such were the figures, so well designed by the Egyptians, which are called hieroglyphics, or sacred symbols. These were specific images selected from natural objects and their parts to designate individual things. The Egyptians used these symbols and sounds to converse with the gods to accomplish extraordinary results. Later, when Thoth or someone else invented the letters of the type we use today for other purposes, this resulted in a tremendous loss, first of memory, and then of the divine science and magic. Like those Egyptians, magicians today formulate images, written symbols and ceremonies, which consist of certain actions and cults, and through which they express and make known their wishes with certain signals. This is the language of the gods, which, unlike all other languages, which change 1,000 times every day, remains always the same, just as natural species always remains the same. For the same reasons, the spirits speak to us through visions and dreams, but we claim that these are enigmas because of our unfamiliarity and ignorance and weak capacities, even though they are the very same sounds and the very same expressions used for representing things. Just as these sounds elude our grasp, likewise our Latin, Greek, and Italian sounds sometimes fail to be heard and understood by the higher and eternal spirits, which differ from us in species. Thus, it is no easier for us to be able to communicate with the spirits than it is for an eagle to converse with a human. Just as there can be conversation and agreement only by means of gestures between groups of humans which do not share a common language, likewise, there can be communication between us and certain types of spirits only because the use of certain signs, signals, figures, symbols, gestures, and other ceremonies. The magician, especially when using the kind of magic which is called theurgy, can hardly accomplish anything without such sounds and symbols. On the communion and interaction of things. From what we've already spoken, one can understand and explain how interaction occurs not only between things which, to the senses, are near to each other, but also between things which are far apart. For, as we have already said, things are united by a universal spirit, which is present as a whole in the whole world and in each of its parts. As a result, just as different light comes together in the same space, likewise the souls of the universe, whether they be finite or infinite in number, interact in their powers and abilities. However, this does not happen to bodies because they are limited to circumscribed by their surfaces and surroundings, and because they are composed of innumerable different parts in different bodies and places. Therefore, no body can act on another body, and no matter on other matter, nor can the material parts of one body act on parts of another body, but rather all actions come from quality and form, and ultimately from soul. The soul first changes the dispositions, and then the dispositions change the bodies. Thus, bodies act on distant bodies, on nearby ones, and on their own parts, by means of a certain harmony, joining, and union which comes from form. For, since every body is governed by a soul or spirit which connects its parts, and since one soul acts on another nearby soul in any direction and wherever it is, it follows necessarily that a soul moves that body, wherever it is, because it is controlled by and subordinate to that soul. Whoever is aware of this indissoluble continuity of the soul and its necessary connection to a body will possess an important principle, both to control natural things and to understand them better. From this follows clearly the reason why a void, i.e., a space empty of any body, does not exist. For no body can leave one place without being replaced by another. During life, the soul does leave its own body, but it cannot leave the universal body, nor can it be abandoned by the universal body, if you prefer to state it that way. For when it leaves one simple or complex body, it moves into another simple or complex body, or from one body left behind, it goes to and enters into another. Thus, it has an indissoluble connection with the universal matter. And since its own nature is to be a continuous whole everywhere, we realize that it exists together with the material body everywhere. From this, we conclude that the void does not exist in the sense of space with matter in it, but rather a void is a space in which different bodies move and succeed each other. It also follows that the motions of the parts of one body towards the parts of another body is continuous. Motion occurs through a continuous space, which is not interrupted by any void located between full spaces, unless we wish to say that a space in which there is no sensible body is a void. A continuous body is an unobservable body, and that is an airy or ethereal spirit. It is very active and very powerful and very similar to the soul, and it is quite different from the dense sluggishness found in observable composite substances. The above-mentioned powers of unobservable spiritual bodies are the source of all powers in observable bodies themselves. Indications of this are the airy spirit which agitates and embroils all the seas, and the invincible forces of winds which, even when they are rather calm and quiet, disturb the earth, break trees, and destroy houses. Lucretius put it well when he said that it was this spiritual body which performs all actions in observable things. Many philosophers have thought that this spiritual body is the same thing as the soul. And the poet has said that this air has the power of fire and the soul. Furthermore, fire, which does not consist of a dense matter like coal, which is rather an ignited body, is to be understood as different from air only accidentally. For true fire is, indeed, a spirit which is sluggish when it is located in an ignited body, but it is lively when it is outside of an ignited body, and its form of motion in a flame or in some intermediate state. This spirit, acting in different ways, forms different bodies and animals, and although not all composite bodies are animals, it must be noted that all animals have a soul which is of the same type in all members of one genus. However, that soul is not actuated in one and the same way because of differences in the dispositions of matter and in objective ideals. From this, it follows that, since there are different and contrary forms, there are also differences and reasons why some animals congregate with each other, being attracted and impelled to various places, while others flee from or pursue each other. All of this is due to the way they are structured. All things desire to preserve their own existence, and thus they forcibly and unwillingly resist separation from the place where they exist and preserve. This force is so strong that the sun or fire attracts water to itself through airy space only after it has first made the water like air, that is, by converting it into a vapor. After that has happened, then the substance which water has attracted willingly, and by means of the same impulse of attraction, it tries to adapt itself so that it slowly becomes more and more like fire, and finally, it becomes fire itself. On the other hand, that most subtle body which is contained in the spirit in the form of fire changes back into water by the opposite sequence as it congeals and thickens. Therefore, the same substance in matter changes from water to vapor, from vapor to air, and from air to the thinnest and most penetrating ethereal body. The latter has been called a spirit by the Egyptians. Moses and Dionysius of Apollonia, although they differ because Moses did not distinguish spirit from soul, according to his words, I do not judge his meaning, which the others did. The other substance, earth, is dry and composed of atoms, which are very solid and indissoluble bodies. In themselves they are neither continuous nor divisible, and thus cannot be changed into any other body. And the substance of water or spirit or air, which is the same, never changes into the substance of atoms or dry earth, nor vice versa. This philosophy is supreme, divine, and true, since it is quite in agreement with nature by positing the following principles of reality. First, water or the abyss or the Styx. Second, dryness or atoms or earth. I am not speaking of the terrestrial globe. Third, spirit or air or soul. Fourth, light. These are so different from each other that no one can be transformed into nature of another, although they do not come together and associate, sometimes more or less, sometimes all or some of them. The double motion of things and on attraction. There are two kinds of motion, natural and preternatural. Natural motion comes from an intrinsic principle, while preternatural motion is from an extrinsic principle. Natural motion is in harmony with nature, structure, and generation of things. Preternatural motion is not. The latter is twofold: violent, which is against nature, and ordered or structured, which is not contrary to nature. What is commonly called natural motion is found in all genera or in all the categories, leaving out the distinction between motion and mutation. For now, we omit all the other classes of motion and their species and consider only natural motion in place. One type of this is possessed by natural things and does not move a thing away from its own proper place. This is circular motion, or a version thereof. The other type is a straight line motion, which is not naturally possessed by natural things. For example, air moves in a straight line to fill a void. A stone moves through air, and a body which is heavier than water moves through water in a straight line in order to occupy the space in which it either is at rest or moves naturally. As much as it can, a contrary flees from its contrary in straight line. For example, fumes, vapor, and water from fire. Likewise, similar and agreeable things tend towards each other in a straight line. For example, straw to amber, iron to a magnet, so that they can rest together or move better and more easily. There is also a third type of locomotion, which is an inflow and an outflow found in all natural things. When any of their parts are ejected in various ways and in every direction, for now, we will call this spherical motion, for it does not occur either in a straight line, or to, or from, or around a center. Rather, it occurs along an infinity of lines from the same center. For while some parts of the body are rejected and omitted outward from the body's convex surface and perimeter, others are reciprocally received and absorbed. Bodies grow and are invigorated when the inflow of beneficial things is greater than their outflow. and then they age and weaken and become sluggish when the inflow of extraneous things is greater than the outflow of natural things. This is the reason why corruption and change occur in things, including all changes or alterations and disintegrations. There is no controversy over the evidence for the first two types of motion, and, as a result, the understanding and classifications of them are well known. But more carefully consider the third type, we will be found to be not only needed and helpful, but also necessary. The situation is especially clear in things which have a very strong, sensible quality. For instance, fire warms in every direction, and not just on one side or the other. For, as soon as it is lighted, it sends out its light and flames in every direction. Likewise, a sound and a voice penetrate equally in all directions, if they occur in a medium which is open on all sides. In the same way, it is quite clear that the sense of smell is activated by the continuous emission of small parts from an odoriferous body. This could not happen unless that body's substance were to flow out and emit its parts in all directions. The same thing happens in the case of reflections and other such observable occurrences. Innumerable other accidental things are caused by certain parts flowing out, and sometimes these parts travel an enormous distance from a very small observable source, as is clear when a smaller amount of something emits a smell for many years. In addition to these observable qualities or powers which are emitted from bodies spherically, there are other, more spiritual and less heavy ones, which not only account on the body and the senses, but also on the interior spirit. The more powerful ones touch the powers of the soul, and cause various effects and passions, and is commonly thought to be true of many stones, herbs, and minerals. This is also clear in fantasies, and in cases where the eye has actively or passively been hit. An example is the basilisk, who, by looking at a man a long way off, can kill him with the sharpness of its vision. How a magnet attracts iron, coral attracts blood, etc. What was said above explains why magnets naturally attract things. There are two kinds of attraction. The first occurs by agreement, as when parts move their proper place and are orientated to that place, and when similar and harmonious things attract each other. The second type occurs without agreement, as when contraries come together because the one which cannot escape is overwhelmed, as when moisture is attracted by fire. This is clear in the case of a burning object being held above a bowl containing water, where the water is sucked up by the heat and rises rapidly. The same thing happens when waterspouts and hurricanes occur at sea, with the result that sometimes even ships are thrown at a great distance upwards by the waves. Attraction occurs in three ways. The cause of the first type is clear to the senses, as is shown in the cases mentioned above. This also happens when the attraction and absorption of air attract objects contained in the air. This is, likewise, evident in pipes through which water is sucked, and thus rises to any level. This happens for the reason given. For if the air in the tube is attracted, and if there is no other air to take its place, then water or earth or something else will fill that space. If nothing can replace it, then the air would be held back and retained by the power of vacuum, as is clear when an opening is obstructed by objects being sucked in and swallowed. Another example occurs when the tongue and lips are held together and their opening is very tightly compressed around the mediating air, and vice versa. When one sucks so that there is an elicited from the mouth's pores a spirit which restores and reestablishes what had been removed from its proper place or space. There is another type of attraction which is not perceived by the senses. This is the case of a magnet attracting iron. The cause of this cannot be attributed to vacuum or any such thing, but only to the outflow of atoms or parts, which occurs in all bodies. For when atoms of one type move towards and mutually encounter other atoms of similar type or of a congenial and compatible nature, the bodies develop such an attraction and impulse for each other that the overpowered body moves towards the whole of the stronger body. For since all the parts experience this attraction, when so must the whole body also be attracted. This is illustrated for the senses in the case of two burning lamps. When the lower one is extinguished, fumes and spirits flow up from it, and the upper flame then rapidly descends to reignite the lower lamp. This is also found in the small flames of torches, to avoid being extinguished by moisture absorbed from the environment. They clearly are attracted to flammable materials located nearby, and they clearly are attracted to a larger flame, either in a straight line or indirectly by jumping or leaping across. And thus it happens that the overpowered parts of iron are attracted by some type of power or quality, even though this happens sometimes by necessity. That is not the rule. The fact that this attraction is caused by the outflow of parts from such bodies also indicates that when a magnet or amber is rubbed, it attracts iron or straw much more strongly. For the heat causes more parts to be emitted, since it opens the pores and rarefies the body. It is clear that a similar explanation is given on how rhubarb attracts choleric humors from the extremities and surface parts of animals to their intestines, when it has sufficient power, that is, when it is not so strong as to be expelled by nature before it acts, nor so weak as only to move the humors and not to attract them. In magnets and similar things, the attractive force and power is not due to an active or passive quality in the commonly used sense of a kind of action or passion, as is found in the four elements. A sign of this is that when a piece of iron touches a magnet, it acquires the same power of attracting other pieces of iron. This could not happen if this were due to an elementary quality. For when heat and coldness are accidentally present in a subject, they quickly disappear when the source of heat is removed. Therefore, one must explain this in terms of the emission of parts, or of a spiritual substance which flows from the magnet into the iron. It is difficult to imagine any other or even similar cause of the for when heat and coldness are accidentally present in a subject, they quickly disappear when the source of heat is removed. Therefore, one must explain this in terms of the emission of parts or of a spiritual substance which flows from the magnet into the iron. It is difficult to imagine any other or even a similar cause of these effects. Also, from this perspective, which is fully self-consistent, it is easy to evaluate the various fantasies and dreams which others have mentioned as the cause of this attraction. The same explanation and cause of accounts for the fact that diamonds are said to block such attraction. Similar types of explanation account for various other things. For the outflow of a specific power can weaken another power, or actuate and sharpen the certain other powers. Thus, it is said that diamonds confer magnanimity on those who wear them. It is not easy to explain why magnetic attraction occurs at the pole of the Earth, especially if what some say is not true, namely, that region there are many large magnetic mountains. This is very hard to believe, but let us assume it anyhow. Then we ask why this attraction occurs at all distance from that place. We are not speaking here of active but passive magnetic attraction. I have not yet experienced whether a magnet attracts another magnet. If there are such mountains, and if they exert their power at such great distances, then since they attract a compass needle at the equator and in the tropics, in our region of the Earth they would attract men wearing armor. But this is completely ridiculous. If we grant that a magnet attracts iron when there is nothing except air between them, and if the attraction occurs in a straight line from our region on Earth to those places across the northern sea where the magnetic mountains and cliffs are located, then a large arc of the heavens lies in between. Therefore, the magnet would attract iron, or another magnet. If that could happen for a similar reason, if our magnet is located at letter A in the description I'm going to draw here, if our magnet is located at point A and the mountains are at point D, the attraction must then occur at B or C, and thus it crosses either through the large straight line distance AB or AC as indicated, or through the large arc of the Earth, AB and AC as indicated. It is clear that this common and well-known argument falls apart for many reasons. To these objections we add that these magnetic mountains do not have the power to attract a magnet because they are similar to each other. If that were the case, we would see a very small magnet attracted by a very large one. Thus, we cannot appeal to attraction as the cause of this effect, because, as we said, it is iron which is attracted, while the magnet rather moves away. For this mineral and iron, which are derived from the Earth, and are cold like the Earth, are contraries by nature. What happens to them is the opposite of what happens to almost all flowers which turn towards the sun and follow the same path of the sun, as can be seen, for the sake of this argument, not only in heliotropes, but also in the narcissus, the crocus, and the innumerable other flowers. Therefore, we can safely say that these things, which are hostile to the sun and to heat, turn towards and hurry towards places that which are the most removed from the sun and heat. Epilogue on the motions which occur in things. Thus, we find that local motion that occurs in many ways. First is the motion which constitutes and preserves life, i.e., the circular motion of things, their own place due to the soul, or native spirit, as we said above. Second is the fleeing of a contrary. Third is the acquisition of something helpful or good. Fourth is the expulsion and rejection by a contrary impulse. Fifth is the violent attraction by a contrary, which needs or seeks some material to convert into itself. Sixth is an animal choice in accordance with the tendency of a natural power. The last is a violent motion, which either impedes or stops natural powers by some device or desire, or which is due to nature itself, which, while it is strong enough to move something in one direction, blocks or impedes another motion of a lesser power, as happens almost everywhere. For example, a natural flow of water in one direction is stopped by another flow of water, as occurs when rivers flowing into the ocean are resisted by the flow of the sea, and are turned back for many miles towards their sources. on the bonding of spirits. As was said earlier, some spirits reside in more subtle matter, others in more dense matter. Some reside in composite bodies, others in more simple bodies. Some in observable bodies, others in unobservable bodies. As a result, the operations of the soul are sometimes easier, sometimes more difficult, sometimes weaker, sometimes well adapted, sometimes impossible. Some spirits operate within one genus, others act more efficaciously in another genus. Thus, humans possess certain operations and actions and desires not found in demons, and vice versa. It is easy for demons to penetrate through bodies and to initiate thoughts in us. The reason for the latter is that they convey certain impressions directly to our internal senses, just as we ourselves sometimes seem to think of something suggested by the internal senses. This knowledge seems to occur according to the following comparison and analogy. If one wishes to generate a thought in something standing at a distance, one must shout so that the thought is produced in their internal sense through their hearing it. But if the person is closer, a shout is not needed, only a quieter voice. And if the person is immediately nearby, a whisper in the ear suffices. But demons have no need of ears or voices or whispers because they penetrate into the internal sense directly, as was said. Thus, they send not only dreams and voices and visions to be heard and seen, but also certain thoughts, which are hardly noticed by some. They communicate truth sometimes through enigmas, and sometimes through sense impressions. Sometimes they may even deceive, but not all things are granted to everyone, although they always happen in a definite sequence and order. Not all spirits or demons have the same level of existence, power, and knowledge. Indeed, we know that there are many more species of them than there are of sensible things. Thus, some of them are brute animals and cause injury without any reason. Although these are far inferior to humans in knowledge, they still can do as much harm as dangerous animals, or of poisons. Mark called these spirits deaf and dumb, i.e., they are without reason, since they recognize no commands, and they do not hear or perceive any threats or prayers. As a result, it has been declared that it is impossible to banish them, although it has also been said that they can be controlled and conquered by fasting or abstinence, and by prayer or lofty meditation, and by the power of the senses. This latter is a medical issue, for spirits of this crass type, like food and pleasure, are located in our dense humors and earthly melancholies, which a doctor controls either by thinning them out through fasting or by expelling them with a proper dose of laxative. There is another type of demon which is fearful, suspicious. These hear and understand voices, but do not distinguish the possible from the impossible, or the appropriate from the inappropriate. They are like humans who are dreaming and disturbed by fantasies. This type of demon is usually expelled by threats of death, prison, fire, and other such things. There are other, wiser demons which reside in pure air, which is a simple substance. They are affected by no cult, no religious practice, and no prayers. Rather, they freely distort all these things and play with humans by counterfeiting illusions of fear, anger, religion, and such things. They understand languages and the sciences, but never make any firm assertions. Also, so these hateful demons introduce confusion and doubt into the human mind and senses. There are also ethereal spirits which are pure and luminous. All agree that they are hostile to no one and are completely good and friendly to virtuous men. But the airy spirits are friendly to some, and hostile and hateful to others. And terrestrial spirits are hostile, or at least are not friendly, since they are less rational and more fearful. In accordance with the saying, they hate what they fear, they deliberately cause injury. But the spirits of fire, which are more properly called heroes and gods, are said to be the ministers of God. The Kabbalists call them Phesim, Seraphim, and the Cherubim. And the prophet of the Psalm said, He made the winds to be his angels, and the flames of his fire his ministers. Hence, Basil and Origen rightly argue that the angels are not completely incorporeal, but are spiritual substances. That is, they are animals with very subtle bodies, which divine revelation has said are fire and flames of fire. In every group of spirits there are sovereigns and rulers, ministers, leaders, governors, and ranks, by which the wiser and more powerful dominate and direct the more ignorant and more uncultured. These roles do not endure forever, but they are also not as briefly constituted as they are among humans, for in many ways the lives of spirits are not comparable to ours, since the soul's union with a simple body is much more easily maintained than it is with like bodies of ours, which are composed of contraries. Their bodies very easily ward off change. Thus, air and water undergo less change than do composite bodies. Furthermore, they are easily restored. For example, when air is divided, it is reunited very easily, and portions of water reunite after they have been separated. Thus, Virgil did not use a ridiculous poetic figure of speech when he said that Aeneas frightened the shades when he cut through their abode with his drawn sword. These various spirits occupy the bodies of humans, animals, stones, and minerals. There is no body which is completely devoid of spirit and intelligence. Furthermore, no spirit possesses a permanent location for itself. Rather, spirits fluctuate from one matter to another, and matter fluctuates from one spirit to another, and from one nature or composition to another. This is what alteration, mutation, passion, and even corruption are, namely the separation of certain parts from others, and their recombination with still others. For death is nothing more than such a disintegration. No spirit and no body ever perishes. Rather, there is only continual change of combinations in actualizations. Parallel to the various actualizations arise from the various composition of things. There are various loves and hates. As we said, everything desires to remain in its present state of existence and does not comprehend or even think about any other new state of being. Therefore, there is, in general, a bonding of reciprocal love of a soul for its own body, and of that body in its own way for its soul. Thus, the diversity of natures and drives gives rise to a variety of bonds which affect both spirits and bodies. We will discuss these bonds immediately after we have first defined the analogy between spirits and composites. On the analogy of spirits. Porphyry, Plotinus, and the other Platonists assigned bodies to spirits as follows. The best and purest spirits, which are also called gods, have bodies of fire, which is the purest and simplest substance. The spirits which have denser elementary bodies exist only by sharing in a more subtle element. Thus, airy spirits have bodies mixed with air and fire. Aqueous spirits have bodies mixed with air and fire. Terrestrial spirits have bodies mixed with water, air, and fire. These substances are invisible because of their thinness. Furthermore, terrestrial and aqueous spirits sometimes choose to make themselves visible by means of dense and concrete vapors, and they appear in the purer regions where the air is more calm and quiet. I, myself, have seen them at Mount Libero and Mount Loro, and they have appeared not just to me, but frequently to local inhabitants, to whom they are sometimes hostile, but only moderately so, by stealing and hiding the local animals, by which they later return in a few days to their stables. It is well known and widely accepted as true that these spirits have also frequently appeared to workers in gold mines and in other underground places. For example, in the mountains of Gabina, these spirits sometimes harmed them, sometimes helped them, and sometimes predicted events. This same type of spirit is found near Nola, in a desolate place near the temple of Portus, and under a certain cliff at the foot of Mount Cicada, which was once used as a cemetery for plague victims. I myself, as well as many others, have personally experienced them while walking through that place at night. I was bombarded with so many stones which violently exploded at a very short distance from my head and other parts of my body, and this continued in a threatening manner for some time. Nevertheless, these stones did not inflict any bodily injuries on me or any others who reported the same experience. These incidents are reported by Celis in his book De Demonibus, or in English, On Demons, where he describes them as refugees from light and as stone throwers, although their projectiles are harmless. The existence of subterranean demons is established not only by the senses, experience, and reason, but also by divine authority in the very wise book of Job, which contains a great deal of the most profound philosophy. When Job curses the day he was born with the words, "May the day of my birth perish," he adds after a few sentences, "Why was light given to one misery, and why was life given to those who are bitter of heart? Why did I not perish as soon as I left the womb? Why was I not hidden and replaced after having been aborted? For now I would be silently asleep, and would rest in my dreams together with the rulers and princes of the earth, whom have built isolated houses for themselves, and have had filled them with their silver." The point at hand could not have been more clearly stated than in these words from the mouth of Job himself. As we said, different spirits reside in different bodies, and their ranks are distinguished by a definite order and justice. Origen, Pythagoras, and the Platonists list humans among the demons, including those who are not good, but who could become good or evil as they live their lives in a better way or worse. This is why both Christian theologians and the better philosophers say that life is like a road and a transition, a journey and a fight. The same judgment applies for other types of beings. Furthermore, we know that the best things into which a soul or spirit enters are the things which preserve the longest. That is what we said at the beginning, namely, all spiritual substances reduced to one, all material substances to three. There is one soul, one God. one first mind above all things, and one soul of the universe. Also, it is very probable that all illnesses are due to evil demons, which are expelled and replaced by their opposites with chants, prayers, meditations, ecstasies of the soul. And it cannot be denied that in some people there are dominating spirits who have the power to dispel certain types of illnesses. They say that Cyrus and other Persian kings would cure diseases of the spleen with the touch of their thumb. And it is well known and clearly established that the same is true of the kings of France, who cure diseases of the lymph glands with the touch of a thumb. It is also said that someone who was the seventh son of the same father, and who was born without the help of a woman, can do the same thing with his saliva. One can prove that demons are material, and they are of several different kinds. But the fact that they have emotions, desires, angers, jealousies, and similar feelings found in humans and in animals composed of observable and more dense matter, that is why the slaughtering and sacrifice of animals were instituted, for these demons are pleased a very great deal by such ceremonies and their fumes. It must be that these demons are constituted very much like us, because they also express their affections for some people and nations, while they detest and hate all others. Some of these demons have other names and are famous and more powerful, while others are more ordinary. The Romans called the latter gods of the dishes, i.e., there were no specific offerings and sacrifices made to them. It is credible that such offerings were not necessary, but rather were pleasing to them, for they could provide for themselves whatever they needed. Nevertheless, these offerings were established for them as luxuries, which they would have to have had without human contributions. For although they were able to know much more than we can, they cannot do and change as many things as we can. Because of their spiritual and more noble and more reasonable characters, they are delighted by sweet scents, and were adequately paid homage at one time by incense, saffron, moss, amber, and fragrant flowers. The more noble and more eminent spirits are said to be pleased by hymns, chants, and musical instruments. Above all, these are the gods who, by nature, have no need of us, and are of neither favorable influence by our merits, nor touched by our anger. Being affected by good or evil actions pertains only to those spirits who can ask and receive from us some arrangement whereby they can have a better and happier life. This does not seem to be all appropriate for those spirits who already enjoy a most happy state. Finally, it must be consciously accepted and firmly asserted that all things are full of spirits, souls, divine power, and God or divinity, and that the whole of intelligence and the whole soul is everywhere. Although they do not do everything everywhere, the poet has taken this idea from the teachings of Pythagoras. And to begin, the heavens, the earth, the water wastes, the lucent globe of the moon, the sun, the stars, exists inward spirit. Their total mass by mind is permeated, hence their motion. From mind and spirit comes life, of man, of beast, of bird, of monsters under the foam-flecked seas. The same message is contained in the sacred mysteries received by all people. Thus, in the Psalms and in the Book of Wisdom it is said, the Spirit of God has filled the whole earth and everything which it contains. And elsewhere, I fill the heavens and the earth. A material substance differs from the substance of the mind and soul and the sublime spirit as follows. The universal body is contained as a whole in the whole universe, but the spiritual substance is contained as a whole in each part. Thus, it exists everywhere as a whole and conveys everywhere an image of the whole, sometimes more clearly and sometimes more obscurely, sometimes in one way and sometimes in many. Thus, the entire nature of its form and light is reflected as a whole by the particles of matter, just as the universal body is reflected by all of matter. This can clearly be seen in the case of a larger mirror, which reflects one image of one thing, but if it has been broken into 1,000 pieces, each one of the pieces still reflects the whole image. Again, when the different parts or bodies of water are separated from the whole, or from the universal ocean by an amphitrite, then they have different names and properties. When the latter flow together into the ocean, they have the same name and properties. Thus, if all the spirits and parts of air were to flow into the ocean, they would produce one soul, which elsewhere is innumerably multiplied. As a result, the philosophers say that in the original state of things, there was one matter, one spirit, one light, one soul, one intellect. Let us now turn our attention to the many bonds between spirits. This is where the whole teaching of magic is to be found. Number 1. The first bond which ties spirits together is general in character, and is represented metaphorically by the three-headed Cerberus of trivia, the doorkeeper of hell. This is the triple power which is needed by one who binds, i.e., by the magician, namely physics, mathematics, and metaphysics. The first is the base, the second is the scale, the third is the summit of the scale. The first explains active and passive principles in general. The second explains times, places, and numbers. The third explains universal principles and causes. This is a triple chord, which is difficult to break. The second bond is also triple, and is needed in the agent, in the action, and in the thing on which the agent acts. It consists of faith or credibility, of invocations, of love and strong emotions in the application of the active to the passive. The role of the soul is to produce changes in the body of the composite, and the role of the body is to change the souls materially. If these bondings do not happen, or especially if they are not present, then no amount of attention or emotion or agitation will produce any results. For a magician is most fortunate, if many believe in him, if he commands great persuasion. Number 3. The third bond, which is the source of effectiveness, is the number of principles, which are distributed according to the 4 sectors of the universe, and which are needed for actions which occur in the heavens and in nature. In addition, there are other principles needed for volitional and preternatural effects, but they do not have a specific location. Number 4. The fourth bond is the soul of the world, or the spirit of the universe, which connects and unites everything with everything else. As a result, everything has access to everything else, as we said above. The fifth bond is the souls of the stars and the principle of places, of the winds and of the elements. Number 6, the souls of demons which preside over times, days, storms, and the elements themselves. Number 7, the souls of men who are tyrants and rulers, and of those who have acquired some degree of fame and thus have become spirits. Number 8, the divine names and the names of the divine orders. Number 9, markings and symbols. Number 10, strong invocations and supplications to make the power of the superior overcome that of the inferior. For example, to banish evil demons by good ones, and to banish lower demons by higher ones. These demons are enticed by sacrifices and holocausts. They are frightened by threats, and they are summoned by the powers of inflowing rays of light. Number 11, by the power of the threefold world, elementary, celestial, and intellectual. Number 12, the disposition to ask good things from good people. For example, chastity, honesty, purification, and abstinence. Number 13, the adoption of cults and natural things in which there reside spirits which are similar to those required for actions. Number 14, the assessment of cults according to their different qualities. Number 15, the force of the consecration which comes from preservation, from prayer, and from rituals. Number 16, a knowledge of feast days and the days and hours of good and bad luck. Number 17, a knowledge of the different objects and methods found in religious observations in regard to the purity of their locations, and in regard to ablutions, contacts, endings, clothing, incensing, and sacrificing. Number 18, the use of active and passive powers, for example, in the first or nearly first elements, and in stones, metals, plants, and animals, in accordance with the 14 conditions. Number 19, rings. Number 20, the techniques of enchantment, on the bondings of spirits, and the first those arising from the 3 conditions of agent, matter, and application. For actions actually to occur in the world, 3 conditions are required. Number 1, an inactive power in the agent. 2, a passive power or disposition in a subject or patient, which is in an aptitude in it not to resist or to render the action impossible, which reduces to one phase, namely, the potency of matter. And number 3, an appropriate application, which is subject to the circumstances of time, place, and other conditions. In the absence of these 3 conditions, all actions are, simply speaking, always blocked. For even if a flute player is perfect, he is blocked by a broken flute, and the application of the former to the latter is useless. Thus, a lack of power in the matter makes an agent impotent and an application unfitting. This is what is meant when we said that in absence of these 3 conditions, strictly speaking, always blocks an action. Closer examination may show that the defect is due to only 2 or even only 1 of these 3 conditions. But in effect, in any of one of them should be understood as meaning a defect in all 3, as when the flute player and his performance are perfect but the flute is defective, or when the player and the flute are perfect but the performance is interrupted. If the whole meaning of efficient action is taken to consist in the application, then the first condition emerges with the third, for the agent is nothing more than the applicator, and to do something is nothing more than to apply something. Not all things are by nature passive or active in relation to all other things. Rather, as is said in the Physics, every passion is from a contrary, and every action is on a contrary, or more specifically, on a disposed contrary, as is stated in the common saying, active powers act on properly disposed patient. From this, it is clear that water mingles and mixes with water because of a similarity in awareness of sympathy, such that after they have united, no device can separate one from the other. Indeed, pure or unmingled wine also mixes with water, and vice versa, thus forming a mixture. But the parts of the wine contain some amount of heat and air and spirits, and thus the wine is not completely sympathetic with the water. As a result, they do not mix at the smallest level, but survive separately, to a noticeable degree, in a heterogeneous compound, so that they can be separated again in various ways. The same thing happens to seawater, which yields fresh water when it is distilled or filtered through wax containers. This would not happen if the mixture had been perfect. Furthermore, oil will never mix with water because the parts of oil cohere and are glued together like lovers, and they neither penetrate nor are penetrated by the parts of water. Therefore, anyone who studies the mixings of bodies with each other should give a great deal of attention to the condition of the parts, for not everything can be mixed with everything else. Thus, one must study the arrangement, composition, and differences of the parts, for a whole can be penetrated by a whole in one direction but not in another. This happens in all things, like stones, wood, and even flesh, which are penetrable, and more penetrable from one side or direction than another. This is clear when fluids are expelled by pushing along the length of fibers, and wood is more easily split lengthwise, for wood is more easily penetrated along its length than its width, because the pores located between the fibers create tubes or passages in that direction. Furthermore, one must not only examine the character and arrangement of the parts, but also the condition of the whole structure, for certain passions are naturally adapted to be received by one subject rather than by another. For example, a torpedo fish causes a shock to the hand, but not to the net, and, as the joke says, the fires of love burn the heart and the breast, but leave the chest cold and uncooked. The same thing happens with thunderbolts, which have at times liquefied a steel sword without damaging its scabbard. As astonishing event also happened in Naples to a very beautiful and noble young girl, whose pubic hair was burned, but nothing else. They also say that when the wood of a barrel was burned away, the wine remained firm and solid without it. Many such things have happened because of this ultimate occult power which resides in the atoms of this kind of fire, and which acts in one place but not in another. The laurel and the eagle are used as insignia by generals and poets because they are never touched by lightning. And so, like them, generals and poets are friends of Apollo and Jupiter. What happened to that young girl does not happen to just any human being. The reason for this is not that all people have similar physical characteristics and temperaments and the same quality of spirit. As a result, not all have a soul that can stop the rains and command the winds of the storms. The astonishing things that happen in bodies must be related to a special constitution which, because of the innumerable differences in them, is due sometimes to the laws of the whole species and sometimes to a special prerogative of the individual. Hence, magicians carefully examine both species and individuals in order to grasp the effects of their power. Prudent leaders they recruit as their soldiers and gather as their military aides not those who are friends or well-known or highly recommended people, but rather those who are more favored by fortune, and those who usually are lucky enough to avoid such dangers. Likewise, by wearing and carrying and otherwise using certain plants and minerals, they try, as if by means of direct contact, to appropriate for themselves certain prerogatives of power. And thus, as leaders protected by laurel crowns, they do not fear the lightning. Next, it should be noted that for specific animals there are poisons, like hemlock generally is for humans, which usually are consumed as a very helpful nourishment by other animals, and which readily fatten them. Likewise, it should be seen that for various species there are different foods, poisons, and antidotes, and an important principle of magic and medicine is to be able to distinguish the different constitutions and explanations of illnesses and good health, and the principles of changing or preserving their forms and dispositions by using external objects. Thus, the chemist knows that nitric acid acts on hard things, such as iron, silver, and bronze, but not on gold or lead. He also knows that quicksilver absorbs oil very rapidly, but gold completely rejects and repudiates it. Furthermore, the seeds or juice of verbena plants are strong enough to break up stones in the bladder, yet seem to do no damage to flesh, bones, membranes, and other parts of the body. There are those who explain these facts in terms of the pores being wide or narrow. I would readily grant these in some cases, but not in most cases, nor in the more important cases which are discussed before us here. For the reason why nitric acid penetrates one thing more than another is not that one has wider pores. Likewise, the spirit of the verbena plant breaks up stones but not bones and flesh, even though the latter has larger pores. And what would they say about diamonds which are not split by fire, the smallest and most penetrating of bodies, even though they do absorb the blood of a billy goat? Therefore, one must maintain in the following principle: not all things are influenced by everything else. Not all effects happen to everything in the same way. To give a proper explanation, the reason must be found in individual effects and cases. The occult forms and differences, things do not have their own names. They are not observable by means of vision and touch, and explanations and their specific origins are not to be found in visual and tactile differences. All we can say about these occult forms is that they do exist. As a result, we conclude that not even the demons themselves could talk about them easily, if they were to choose to discuss them with us, using our words and the meanings which are signified by our words. Secondly, the bondings arising from sounds and songs. A second type of bonding is based on the conformity between numbers, between measures, and between times. This is the origin of those rhythms and songs which have such a very great power. Some people are affected more by tragedies, others by comic melodies, and others are affected generally in all cases. Some even react like that barbarian general who, when he heard musical instruments played very skillfully, said that he preferred to hear the neighing of his horse. He clearly proved by this that he was a disgrace and was unworthy of appearing to be human. By the term songs, we intend to refer to much more than harmonies, for as some have experienced, the most powerful songs and poems seem to contain more discord than harmony. Perhaps such was the condition of the soul of that subhuman general, who was more easily influenced by the sounds of his horse's neighing. For just like someone who looks at the sensible harmonies of vision, the souls of humans and horses and dogs are captured by different harmonious sounds, and different things are beautiful according to the condition of each species. As is said in the proverb, "From an ass to a lyre," not all songs are well suited for everyone. And as different harmonies bind different souls, so also different magicians bind different spirits. These bonds are tenacious for two reasons. First, they are perceived or encountered in the soul through hearing, just as voices of the Marsi and of the Silly became such powerful voices that they were present in the serpent. Second, the bonding effect is brought to completion by an occult murmur which, analogously to the relations between spirits, did not originally come from the binder to the bound for the purposes of bonding. For those who are enhanced do not always hear the voice of their enchanters, and even when they do, they are not sensibly affected immediately. Further, one should note that the rhythm or characteristics of one sound can mingle with and obscure the rhythm of another sound. As a result, it is said that when a wolf, or some say a deer, is seen by people who are bonded to the spirit of that animal, they lose their voices and cannot easily form words. And they say that when a drum made of sheepskin is located next to a drum made of wolfskin, the former loses its sound, even though otherwise it emits strong sounds when forcefully hit. The reason for this is that the spirit which somehow remains in the dead wolf's skin can bond with and control the spirit in the sheepskin, and thus they are subject to the same antagonism and dominance which are present in the living animals. I have not personally experienced this, but it is a possibility and is reasonable, even though this relationship is not always found between living things and between species. The ass fears the wolf no less than does the sheep, and is equally frightened by its danger. Nevertheless, a drum made of the skin of a wolf does not diminish the equally strong beats from a drum made of the skin of an ass, but rather increases their loudness considerably. Let us consider lyres whose strings are made of the tendons of sheep and wolves, which are always opposed. It is well known by many that if two lyres, or cithers, are constructed in the same way, and if a string of only one of them is plucked, its sound is not only constant with the string of the other, but it will generate the same motion in the other. This, indeed, is quite understandable. It also happens that, through a certain sound or gesture, or other such thing, the presence of one person affects the soul of the other person, and thus an indissoluble friendship arises. There are those we dislike without reason as soon as we see them, and also others we love without cause. This love and hate are sometimes reciprocal, and sometimes not. This happens because of the domination of the one person over the other in respect to one type of feeling, which in turn is blocked by another type of feeling in the other person. Thus, we are attracted by a feeling of love for one type of dog, bird, while they may be struck by fear, and thus avoid and dislike us. This type of bonding also includes prayers and petitions, which some use solicit both peers and superiors in cases where considerations of justice, honesty, or reason produce no results. Sometimes proposals from fools and buffoons are so effective that people who are clever try to ensnare the souls of their superiors by playing such a role rather than by using more proper means. This happens during the papacy of Julius III, who rejected and dismissed those who would pray, beg, or cry. But if someone approached him with humor and wit, after kissing his foot, that person would be able to get from him whatever he wanted. He might also consider the art of speaking and its type of spiritual bonding. This occurs in songs and poems, and in whatever orators do to persuade, to dissuade, and to move the emotions. The orators omit the other part of this art and try to hide them in the lap of magicians or philosophers or those versed in politics. But Aristotle has covered most of it in his Rhetorica ad Alexandrum, where he organizes his considerations under two headings. He examines first what the speaker needs and finds helpful, and second, what is pleasing and amusing in what he says or binds, by considering his habits, status, conclusions, and practices. But this is not the place to recall and review all these matters. Thirdly, the bondings arising from vision. The spirit is also bonded through vision, as has been said before, when various forms are observed by the eyes. As a result, active and passive items of interest pass out from the eyes and enter into the eyes. As the adage says, I do not know whose eyes make lamb tender for me. Beautiful sights arouse feelings of love, and contrary sights bring feelings of disgrace and hate, and the emotions of the soul and spirit bring something additional to the body itself, which exists under the control of the soul and the direction of the spirit. There are also other types of feeling which come through the eyes and immediately affect the body for some reason. Sad expressions in the other people make us sad and compassionate and sorry for obvious reasons. There are also more impressions which enter the soul and the body, but it is not evident how this happens, and we are unable to judge the issue. Nevertheless, they act very powerfully through various things which are in us, that is, through a multitude of spirits and souls. Although one soul lives in the whole body, and all the body's members are controlled by one soul, still the whole body and the whole soul and the parts of the universe are vivified by a certain total spirit. Hence, the explanation of many spiritual feelings must be found in something else which lives and is conscious in us, and which is affected and disturbed by things which do not affect or disturb us. And sometimes we are touched and injured more significantly by those things whose assaults we are not aware of than we are by things which we do perceive. As a result, many things which are seen and forms which are absorbed through the eyes do not arouse any consciousness in the direct or external sensory powers. Nevertheless, they do penetrate more deeply and lethally, so that the internal spirit is immediately conscious of them, as if it were a foreign sense or living thing. Thus, it would not be easy to refute some of the Platonists and all of the Pythagoreans, who believe that the one human person of himself lives in many animal spirits. And when one of these animals dies, even the most important one, the others survive for a long time. Hence, it would be obviously stupid to think that we are affected and injured by those visible forms which generate clear awareness in the senses and the soul. That would not be much different from someone who thinks that he is injured more or less only by blows of which he is more or less conscious. However, we experience more discomfort and suffering by being pricked by a needle or a thorn irritating the skin than we do by a sword thrust from one side of the body to the other, whose effect is later felt a great deal more, but at the time we are unaware of the injury caused by the penetration of its body and its part. So indeed, There are many things which stealthily pass through the eyes and capture and continuously intrude upon the spirit up to the point of death of the soul, even though they do not cause as much awareness as we do less significant things. For example, seeing certain gestures or emotions or actions can move us to tears. And the souls of the same faint at the sight of the spilling of another's blood or in observing the dissection of a cadaver. There is no other cause of this than a feeling which binds through a vision. Fourthly, the bondings arising from the imagination. The role of the imagination is to receive images derived from the senses and to preserve, combine, and divide them. This happens in two ways. First, it occurs by the free creative choice of the person who imagines, for example, poets, painters, story writers, and all who combine images in some organized way. Second, it occurs without such deliberate choice. The latter also happens in two ways, either through some other cause which chooses and selects, or through an external agent. The latter, again, is twofold. Sometimes the agent is mediated, as when a man uses sounds or appearances to bring about stimulations through the eyes or ears, and sometimes the agent is unmediated, as when a spirit, rational soul, or demon acts on the imagination of someone, asleep or awake, to produce internal images in such a way that something seems to have been apprehended by the external senses. Consequently, some possessed people seem to see certain sights and hear certain sounds and words which they truly think are caused by external subjects. Hence, they strongly and persistently assert that what they have seen and heard is true, when it is their reason which is deceived, and not their senses. For they do hear what they hear, and they do see what they see. But the very same thing which they think they see, as derived from external sounds in their ears, and from external sights absorbed by their vision, are fantasy images presented to their internal sense. However, they think that these impressions of internal sense are real things. Thus, it happens that they refuse to be recalled to a healthier point of view by actual witness, whom they prefer to reject in favor of their own imagination, and who they truly think are deaf and dumb. Medically, these matters are cases of mania and melancholy, and are called the dreams of the wakeful. Further, this type of bonding is due simply to a material principle, as is believed by certain well-known medical people with an obstinacy which is most crude and oppressive, nor is it due simply to a demonic or diabolical efficient causes, and is, as is believed on their part by some theologians. Rather, both causes co-operate. The material factor is a melancholic humor, which we call the kitchen or the bathhouse of the Saturnalia demons. But the efficient cause and moving spirit is a demon who does not have a completely immaterial substance, because these demons seem to be endowed with many animal affections and have definite properties of denseness. Although they are spiritual substances, nature has given them a body which is very thin, and is not endowed with senses. They belong to that genus of animal which, as we said, has more species than do living, composite and sensory animals. Now, a specific soul comes to a specific seed which has been properly deposited in a specific place. Or conversely, a body makes or produces from itself, as it were, a specific animal form or living thing. For example, from one seed the olive is born, from another a dog, from another a human, and in general one thing or another is suited to be born from a body which is structured in the way or another. As the poet says, the eggs come to where the seed is sown. As a result, the proper seed being sown in the proper field, good and evil spirits in the beginning of consciousness are born from a proper mixture and combination of specific hearts or brains or animal spirits, and conversely, improper mixtures produce disturbances. These results are mutual. Certain souls bring certain bodies into existence, and certain bodies bring certain souls into existence. In accordance with that are called the substantial and the specific difference and substance. When two spirits approach and come near to each other, either because of accidental combination or because the objects attached to the body, then the dominance of a raging spirit can be removed safely and methodically. This is done either by incantations, that is, by a rhetorical and friendly and curing persuasions which restore the besieged spirit, or by the expulsion, evacuation of noxious material with purgative medicines, or by foods and a happy, sunny atmosphere which are agreeable to human life, and which introduce better matter for the spirit, or by soothing and moderating the harmful materials which sometimes enter into the mix. As a result, the spirit alone does not produce these living animal operations, nor does the body do this without the spirit. Rather, for these things to occur, whether they be good or bad, or in accord with or in opposition to the nature of the species, what is required both a material principle and a formal or efficient cause of the needed type. Further, it is reasonable to say that a simple purgation of humors and a simple diet are adequate to cure disturbed images and to free the internal senses which are bound in this way. However, from this, one cannot accept the conclusion drawn by a most stupid and dull-witted medical man in this book, De Occultis Naturae Miracalis, on the hidden miracles of nature, which presents more nonsense than words and sentences can describe. He concludes that spirits are the same as humors, because the expulsion and evacuation of humors also expels and evacuates these spirits in their marvelously independent and structured powers. In this way, with equal justice, one could say that, because of the excellence of the soul forces to leave the body, and be many souls in succession, he should think that the soul itself is a humor or excrement. Or if he himself were to decide to abandon his house, and contrary, because a shortage of food and water made him ignorant of medicine and the obvious colors and sounds of nature, we should conclude that he himself belongs to the same species as the things which expelled him, since the senses happen to be bound, for this is the doorway and entrance for all the actions and passions and feelings of animals. And to that linkage is tied the more profound power of thought. Obligated in these ways, magic and medicine must pay very special attention to the workings of the imagination. Fifthly, the bondings arising from thought. The bondings of the imagination would not be very significant in themselves if they did not duplicate the powers of thought. For those appearances which bind and obligate the souls of those who are simple-minded, stupid, credulous, and superstitious, are derided and condemned by the empty shadows by those who have a sober, disciplined, and well-bred mind. As a result, all practitioners of magic, medicine, and prophecy produce no results without a pre-given faith, unless they act according to the rules of that faith. We use the word faith here in a more general sense in which it is used by these people, individually and as a group. The faith arises in some people from their pre-given powers, which are well disposed and organized, and in others it becomes from a disturbance of their powers. Indeed, great results are produced by those bonds which come from the words of a man of eloquence, by which a certain disposition rises and flourishes in the imagination, which is the only entrance for all internal feelings, and is the bond of bonds. This is the point of Hippocrates saying, "The most effective doctor is the one whom most believe." The reason for this is that he binds many people with his eloquence, or presence, or fame. This applies not only to medicine, but to any type of magic, or to any power identified by a different title. 4. In the act of binding, the imagination must be stimulated, or else one can hardly motivate anyone by other means. Now, in regard to the notion that it is possible for a person to do everything on his own, the theologians agree and state publicly that it is impossible to help those who do not believe in the minister. The reason for their lack of power lies in the imagination, which they cannot bind. Indeed, kinsmen reject and laugh at physicians and divinees because they know about their humble origins and education. As the well-known adage states, no one is a prophet in his own land. Thus, someone who is less well known can bind people more easily, given a good general impression and a disposition to be believed. He could somehow use the power of his soul to arrange, disclose, and explain things for them, as if windows which had been closed are opened to receive the light of the sun. This opens the door to those other impressions which the art of binding seeks in order to establish further bonds, namely hope, compassion, fear, love, hate, indignation, anger, joy, patience, disdain for life, for death, for fate, and all of the powers which cross over from the soul to change the body. There is no need for a more detailed investigation and consideration of the changes which occur to the types of bondings which follow upon the faith and a good impression, and which were just listed above. Further, it is not our business at present to examine the more spiritual powers of the soul which follow next, namely memory, reason, experience, intellect, and mind, because the acts of these powers do not flow over into the body and change it. Rather, all physical changes originate from the powers which are prior to thought and which are its principal and efficient causes. As a result, all magical powers, active and passive, have their species, are dependent upon magical bondings. As Plotinus has asserted, both the wise man and the fool can be bound by natural principles residing in them, unless the subject also contains some principle which can reject the dismissal magical influences. For as was said, not everything enters into everything else, and not everything mixes with everything else, as, for example, water and oil do not mix, as Plotinus himself has stated, and as Porphyry confirms in his Vita Platoni, the life of Plotinus. The evil spells which a certain Egyptian tried to bind and injure Plotinus were turned back against him. These things are discussed in A General Account of Bonding. The End, an essay on magic, Giordano Bruno.